Hello, everyone. I wanted to note and let you know that this lecture is being recorded. Thank you so much for all of you for being here tonight. I'd like to welcome you to Boston University's Tuesday night lecture series. My name is Lucy Kim, and I am Assistant Professor of Painting and Interim Chair of Graduate Studies in Painting at BU School of Visual Arts. Hosted by the MFA programs in Painting, Sculpture, and Graphic Design, the Tuesday night lecture series brings practicing artists, curators, and art historians to BU to present their work. The series is an integral component of the MFA programs, which provides 2 years of intensive studio practice and artistic community in the heart of BU's urban campus. In addition to a public lecture on their work, many of our speakers meet with students for individual and group critiques, as well as hands-on workshops. For the second half of this fall, we have upcoming talks by artists Kianda Strobert, Jerome Harris, Anthea Hamilton, and Julianne Swartz. For more information, registration links, and recordings, please refer to the URL in the chat. All lectures this fall will be held virtually, and recordings of many of the talks will be available on the same site. Please input any questions in the Q&A, and we will get to them after Tishan's lecture. I'd like to confess to the Zoomiverse that tonight's speaker, Tishan Hsu, is an art hero of mine, and I feel incredibly honored to have him here at BU. There's not much I can add to the eloquent writing about his work and practice that's already out there, but I can offer some anecdotes that I feel embodies how I feel about his work and presence as an artist in this world. When planning for this fall's lecture series began last spring semester, I told a colleague of mine that I wanted to invite Tishan, but I was worried that he would decline as I had no connection to him whatsoever, other than being a fan. I had also read that he had recently retired from teaching at Sarah Lawrence, and I was sure he would want to be left alone in a studio. This colleague lit up and excitedly told me how he had recently taken some of our grads to see Tishan's show at the Hammer Museum in LA, and seeing his work filled in a mysterious void in American art history for the 80s for him, and that things are making a bit more sense now. I agreed wholeheartedly with this sentiment and decided it would be worth it to be rejected by such an important artist. The second anecdote involves a conversation over dinner with an artist friend of mine. I mentioned that I was planning on inviting Tishan for BU's lecture series, to which he responded in total complete shock, "Oh my God, he's alive?" And that, to me, sums up the prophetic quality and historical significance of Tishan's work, the arc of his career that includes a mysterious hiatus from the art world. So thank you so much, Tishan, for being here with us tonight. It is tradition in the graduate painting program for a current student to introduce the speaker. Tonight, first-year MFA student Sunny Chen will introduce Tishan Hsu. Thank you, Sunny.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sunny Moxin Chen. It's my honor and pleasure to introduce our guest speaker here, Tishan. So my personal experience with Tishan and his works started 2 years ago. It was my first time seeing his works in person at the Armory Show in New York City in 2018. As I walked into the show space, Tishan's art struck in my mind immediately, as I have never seen uncanny works like that. Objects in mid-flesh tone, not so bright nor too dark. Surfaces are neither too flat nor bumpy. Rounded corners with no sharp or hard edges. In his work, the body seemed to be absent, but tethered within a dark monitor-like form. Staring at the work longer, I feel the relationship between the human body and environment. The sense of losing oneself and time emerged. Are we looking at the monitor, or is it looking at us? I've never seen Tishan's video. Tishan chose to make paintings and sculptures that imply and examine the effects of technology and embodiment rather than using technological medium approaches. His work's aesthetic, but somehow feel dynamic. They make me sense the invisible current moving beneath its organic surface. Many of his iconic works were made back in the 1980s, but they look so present and futuristic. For instance, an Instagram logo-like painting, Closed Circuit 2, was made 24 years before the invention of this social media platform. How bizarre. Earlier this spring, before I came to BU, I heard Tishan from his virtual Zoom lecture through Yale School of Art that was given in his car. From that and other internet sources, I learned more about the artist and his works. Tishan Hsu was born in Boston, Massachusetts. He spent his first years in Zurich, Switzerland, and grew up in Ohio, Wisconsin, Virginia, and New York. Hsu had his first one-person exhibition as a teenager in Virginia, where his paintings were shown throughout the region. He received his bachelor and master degrees in architecture at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. While at MIT, Hsu studied film at the Carpenter Center for the Visual Arts of Harvard University. He moved to New York in 1979, where he currently resides. Since 1985, Hsu has shown in the United States, Europe, Mexico, and Asia with works in many public and private collections. From 1988 to 1990, Hsu lived and worked in Cologne, Germany, and after his mother passed away, he went to China and maintained a studio in Shanghai for 2 years and worked from his extended family photographs. Seeking what he calls the effect of painting without painting, he began playing with silicon and aluminum, which are more commonly known as sculptural media. Hsu's works is included in the collections of Metropolitan Museum of Art, New York, Centre Pompidou, Paris, Museum für Moderne Kunst, Frankfurt and Maine, High Museum, Atlanta, Museum of Contemporary Art, LA, North Miami, Weisman Art Museum, Minneapolis, and M.Arch Gallery in Hong Kong. Hsu has served as the member of the board of White Columns and the Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture. He was a professor of visual arts at Sarah Lawrence College and a visiting professor at Pratt Institute and Harvard University. His first survey exhibition in the US, Tishan Hsu Liquid Circuit, was on view earlier this year at the Harman Museum, LA, and now travels to SculptureCenter, New York, on view until this November. Hsu's work will be included in the 13th Gwangju Biennale, Minds Rising, Spirits Tuning in Korea next year, and his first solo exhibition at Miguel Abreu Gallery will be held in 2021 as well. Now, please join me in welcoming our guest, Tishan.
Well, thank you, Lucy and Sunny, for the very gracious introduction. It feels a little strange to be, I guess, in this position. On many levels, first of all, this is a very strange time to be giving a talk. I think we're all going through this unprecedented period now, and I've been dealing with it on many levels, including how to figure out how to work even. And at the same time, it's very uncanny for me to be giving a lecture through this internet on this Zoom lecture. It's so ironic because that has been what my work has tried to convey or to explore. So here I am 30 plus years later, and I'm actually in it. So in a way, this is what my work is about. At the same time, I'm trying to tell you what my work is about. So just one addition to Sunny's introduction is that we had to postpone the SculptureCenter show because of the early COVID protocols. The Hammer show had to be closed early, and so the show will be up until January rather than November. So it has opened a few weeks ago in New York, for those of you who might be able to see it. So I think I'd like to share a screen and begin the talk. So I'm going to, given the time that we have, I'm going to try to go into some key issues that I kind of was wrestling with in the evolution of my work. And I'll give you just a brief background in terms of how I just came into the work from basically being a grad student. So this is from 1976. I just come out of grad school. I had always been somewhat ambivalent about being an artist. And I realized after studying architecture that I needed to take a year off and just allow myself to do art. And then I could make a final decision whether I was going to make the jump. I had worked with a professor at MIT in painting, and he taught one seminar in painting. MIT didn't have any art program, so to speak, other than some art and technology courses. But he said after grad school, he said, you won't ever go back to it because you've been away from it too long. He had recommended as a freshman when I took a seminar, he said, you should just drop out of MIT and go to New York. And that was a little too radical for me at the time. And I was just very involved with what was going on in my academic work. And so I went through the whole program. But in the middle of the program, I did do a lot of filmmaking, and I almost considered being a filmmaker. I thought film was going to be the medium of the future. So I say that only because I think that sense or that sensibility of media started very early. But the reason I went to painting and sculpture was because that's what I had been trained in from very, very early on. Literally from elementary school, I was studying painting. And I felt that filmmaking at the time, independent filmmaking, where there was no software, there was no computer, it just took a very long time to raise the funds to do the work. It was very expensive. You might wait 3 or 4 years to see your work finally reach the public, and that was just too long a trajectory. I didn't feel I could work with that time frame. So I said, whatever I'm going to do, even though I thought media was really the wave of the future, that I would try to address those issues in something more traditional with materials, that being painting and sculpture. That's the category that we talk about. So it was kind of with resignation that I decided to take this year off, and I did some work. And this piece here was from the end of that year. I actually went out I stayed at kind of a big old summer house a friend's family had that was not heated at all. It was barely heated out in Cohasset. And I took the living room as my studio, and this piece was made there. And in fact, the wood on the bottom was covered with sand. That sand came from that beach. This is some photographs glued onto wood, and this is just like a wood stair. But the reason, for some reason I hung on to it, but it really has some of the key themes that's in all of my work. And it sort of astonishes me that even that early. So it has the media, the TV. It has the body. You can see the body parts. It has a sense of modularity in the grid. This is not metal. This is just photographs that were just paper glued right onto the wood. I wasn't concerned with preservation at the time. I was just trying to deal with ideas. And then there's the kind of physicality of the present. There's that stick wrapped with yarn. It's a photograph of that stick. So I was dealing with the idea of the photograph of the image, but the image could be the thing right there. It's just a stick. And then at the same time, there's this wood covered with sand that these photographs are embedded in. So there's the issue of the thing, the object, and then there's a sense of illusion that the photographs kind of introduce. And then there's a screen within the photographs of another virtual reality. So I think that kind of encapsulates the sensibility that, for some reason, I was interested in going towards. I only say going towards because I really didn't know what it was. This is all very intuitive. Okay. So when I came to New York, this was the next works I'm going to show you are the works I did when I first came to New York. And I was working on wood. This is a kind of cement compound on wood with acrylic, and then I use oil stick on the wood itself for the screen images. So it's hard to read my work. Many people have said once they actually see it that it's nothing like what they imagined from just seeing it on the images. So this is very heavy kind of cement, and I was going for something very primitive. I purposely wanted that quality. And then the flat screen areas are very flat. So it's an illusion of texture. And I wanted the heaviness of this concrete because it kind of heightened the flatness of the screen. So you can see from the work I just showed you, there's this, again, this duality of the thing, the object, and then the virtual behind it. This also introduces a kind of philosophical position here, where the world within the screen is the same world of the object itself. So it's like it's conscious of itself. So that, I think, was one aspect where I saw media was going to unfold. I didn't know how, but there was this intuitive sense. Well, I mean, people were already talking about that in terms of the TV, that, you know, we're sort of creating the world in the TV that we then watch again. So it's like this self-reflexive world. And the roundness was really about just that this is a thing here. This is not a square painting that you look into. So here was a piece that I was more kind of invoking literally the screen. And it was almost in a way, I've never shown this before. It was the first time it's being shown actually is at the Sculpture Center. I always thought it was too literal, and it was a little too, I sort of feel like, too clumsy. But at that time, I was just grasping for how I was going to get there. And this was sort of like, almost like you can imagine, jamming the body into a screen. Many people have mentioned Cronenberg's work and Videodrome, and even Crash. So there is definitely, I think at the time, in music and in film, there was this sensibility that was beginning to emerge. In visual arts, not so much. So again, this is, the illusion is all done with just scratching of oil, like you would when you were in, I mean, when I was in elementary school, we would do this thing where you black crayon over colored crayon, and then you scratch through to do the drawing. So that's the basic technique here. I didn't really think of that when I was doing it. I was trying to get the quality of media, the static of the television screen. There was no computer, there was no internet, there was no cell phone. It was really just radio and TV that I was responding to. And from this work, I began to just see where this would go, this kind of duality of the physicality and the illusion. And these works here reflect those experiments. Here I'm going to give you a close-up just to get a sense of the detail. You can see this heavy, heavy concrete. It projects from the wood, and all of this here is completely flat. So in that sense, I was thinking about the illusionary world of historical Western painting, as in painting of three-dimensional space, even from the Renaissance. And there's something about that that I found very captivating, but that I also saw this whole sense of media was, in a weird way, another kind of illusionary world. So I saw a kind of, I don't know how you'd say it, a structural parallel going on, in that, if studying, you know, the history of art, that there was a time when all of reality was expressed through religious figures, religious stories. And that was a kind of illusionary world that was reflecting on the real world, or even reflecting on human emotions. It all had to go through this, this transitional religious interface. And then I was seeing media as another kind of illusion, that we are going into this, well, we're actually there now, but this was in 1984, that we're going into this illusionary world that was going to be as real to us as the real world, as we're coming from the 20th century, or mid-20th century. So in a way, I think my work reflects a kind of transition, frankly, between this more concrete modernist sense of things, where things were very, how should I say it, very literal. So we talk about, you know, if you want to talk about a minimalist object, everything is, it is what it is and nothing else, like in Stella, Frank Stella's painting, where he reduced the painting just to black paint on the canvas, and that's it. Into a world in which we're really in a very illusionary world now. I mean, in a sort of dangerous way. In this work here, I'm trying to, this body of work, capture this paradox of an illusion and this object, in the sense that I think at the same time, you know, we're in a world where we're getting more and more consumer objects. This is the whole, in the 80s when I was emerging, there was a lot of discussion about the commodity and the commodification of our culture. And so there's a sense of our relation to objects has been increasing, and that we are almost becoming our objects. But I was trying to make that at the same time, we're also becoming the media and this whole illusionary world that the internet was going to kind of surround us with. And so I didn't want to do one or the other. I didn't want to do sort of minimalist object, nor did I want to go into sort of representational painting, as much as I respected it and the tradition of it. I wanted to do something else both. So what you have here is the illusion responds to the object. So this illusionary world, in a sense, is an object at the same time. And I think that's what the strangeness of the work is. It's an illusion of an object. At the same time, it is an object. And anything that I do inside the work is responding to the fact that this is this boundary of an object. It is not a square window or a crop that we are looking into a world. It is in our world, but then it's an illusion at the same time. And for me, that is a little bit what media was about. That's one affect that I saw that media was. And this is a piece where these experiments I just showed you kind of coalesced, and this is kind of the first piece where I felt like I could really go with this now. It was a very seminal piece for me. It convinced me that there was something here. And the work from this, I then did the work that proceeded from this. This was the idea of trying to get a figure, a sense of the figure, but with this flatness that begins to undulate or wave. So I've just talked about this sense of paradox and duality of the illusion, and then the sense of object. At the same time, there was a sense of the media and the body, and how I was going to describe, how I was going to talk about the world. So these earlier ones were somewhat abstract. I was trying to, for instance, in this one back here, this is a landscape, trying to see whether I could, you know, address major properties of the world that we inhabit, such as the body, the landscape, and media. Those were the three components. And what I saw was that in all three cases, there's this topographical flatness that begins to move or to undulate, whether it's the body and the skin and holes or projections, or whether it's the landscape when you have cavities and you have hills, or if it's the media, and at the time there was a media screen where, for instance, when the image goes out of the TV, the screen would just roll, and you'd have these kind of rolling flatness. So for me, that kind of said, that is the, how should I say, formal operation that all the work will proceed from. And that would allow me to then talk about landscape, the land, as well as the body, as well as media. And so these were the pieces I was beginning to see where this would go. So here, this is a little more sort of imaginary. It has a kind of, how should I say, it has sentience. It's a thing, it's a strange thing, but it also has a sense of livingness. And this is one that relates more to body. And this was called ahead, only in the sense that I was trying to think forward here. I'm going to show you some detail for those of you who have not seen my work in actuality. This is a scratching onto the enamel. And you can see it was very much like drawing. And then this is from the side, you can see this is a very thin piece of wood, 3/8 inch plywood. And then these are the projections, just so you know how to read the work. And this is a side view. So here I'm putting in the screen again. So this is where the screen is becoming the reality, and at the same time, there's within the screen is screen. I did never imagine that that's actually what we look at now on our laptops. It's just screen within screen within screen, and it's world within world within world. And that's what this was trying to, in a way, imagine. So this is a screen, but it's also body. So it's our bodies are in the screen, and then our bodies are in a way are also aware of additional screens. Now I should say, and many of you, by the way, if at this point now, if you go to SculptureCenter.org, the Sculpture Center has my the installation shots from both the Sculpture Center show and the Hammer show, and a lot of the articles in press and stuff about the work, so that you can read further about what I'm going to just briefly talk about today. So this here happened when I first moved to New York, and at the time I took a job in word processing in a law firm, and the job was I was facing a monitor and doing in the early days of word processing. And that I was literally examining what is going on here. I was working at night. I took the night job, and I was looking at this screen all night, and it didn't really bother me. It wasn't like watching TV. It was like a whole nother world, although it was language. But then I was sitting in front of this object, and that was this paradox that I've been talking about, and that I actually was experiencing it there, and I was examining what is going on here in front of me, and that's what propelled this whole dialogue, basically, I was having. I'm showing you this piece because here again, this is a larger kind of expression of this whole screen, outer banks of memory. Memory was referring to computer memory. And then I put an object, this is in front of the piece, that's another screen. These are two quick installation shots from my first show, my first one-person show at Pat Hearn's in the East Village. This was her first gallery on Avenue B. The rounded corners are really, again, about establishing them as objects. I think I've mentioned that. Okay, so after this first show, I'm showing this partly because there was so much confusion and people were going all over the place with this work. They said, are you interested in faux wood? Are you interested in musical instruments? And I decided I was trying to deal with too many issues, and that I needed to narrow down the work and just focus on one thing. And so I decided to really make the objects very technological, so people at least would get that's the world I wanted to address. And so instead of using my hand making the lines, I started using a guide, like an aluminum rod, and so the lines got straighter. It just got much techier. At the same time, I did not want to give up the sense of body. So I was still trying to maintain that while getting much more tech. So I think it gets clear here where there's a sense of body and there's a sense of tech and the sense of the object. And this is all just flat, it's all illusionary. So this was my second show with Pat. And you can see now they're really techie objects in a sense, or an illusion of an object. This is one of the works here. Yeah, and so it just distilled a lot of the things I had been dealing with in the prior 3 or 4 years. I think this is the piece that Lucy was referring to. This is kind of thinking of an object that begins to breathe or that begins to live in some way. And so that's kind of how I was thinking of it. I didn't know what that would mean. So there was no AI, there was no, but I had an intuition that's where technology was going. So I'm stopping, I'm shifting here now to the sculpture because that's another element of my practice. And there are these points, I should say, looking back now retrospectively at this work from, let's say, that's the work that's covered in the Hammer and the Sculpture Center show, was from the early 80s to maybe 2005. And there are different projects that I'm doing through the periods that represent different kind of investigations. I never felt I understood really what I was doing. So everything was very intuitive. I didn't really have a statement as to what my work was about. I always told people, I said, the work is going to reveal itself. I cannot say what it is. And that, in a way, made it more difficult, I think, for people to even understand what I was doing. So that also impeded my ability to develop a market and develop myself in the art world after a certain amount of exposure, because the art world was very much into critical theory and a lot of articulation and explanation. And I was very much interested in going to an area that would not be, that would rely much more on my intuition. So in that sense, I was not interested in sort of invoking art history or art historical visual tropes. So this I just wanted to show you here for just this area here, which is showing you how this flatness begins to curve. And that was the same thing that I talked earlier about, this topographical surface that moves and then undulates. So even in the sculpture with this tile, with the curved corner, I could do that. So this is not about just using different materials that we use in the real world, like whether it be an automobile tire or a radio. It was specifically for the physical property of this flatness, this gridded flatness of the tile that was curved, and also that it came in different colors. So I always wanted to be able to use color. That's from my earlier painting background, which I won't have time to talk about today. So this work was in my third show at Pat's, and this is 3 images of it. This is at the Sculpture Center now. It's called Ooze. And this was trying to, in sculpture, give you this sense of an expansive flatness that just goes on and on and on. What am I doing in the work here? You can see, first of all, that it's raised off the floor and it's floating. There is neon red underneath that reflects down, particularly if it's a white floor, and Pat had a white floor. So my point is to be, it's like it could move any point. It's to be contingent. And later on, you'll see in my sculpture that they're on wheels. I'm always interested in that they're never fixed in place, like being on a base. It's just arbitrarily for a moment, it's there. And this piece is there in the sense that it just goes, and the curves are that it could be fluid like liquid and just go anywhere. And in this exhibition at Pat's, I had 3 works. That was the whole show. And there was this piece here that was on the wall, this vertical piece called Vertical Ooze, and Ooze itself. And I wanted to sort of take the sense that it could be on the wall, it could be on the floor, or it could rise up vertically. That was arbitrary. That whatever this thing that oozes all over, it in physical space could be anywhere. And the metaphor I was really thinking was the web itself. That this world looking at the screen was just going to go anywhere and everywhere at any time and any place. And that sense of contingency was what I'm trying to grasp. But in a very traditional media. I mean, so this is really the task here is, how can I convey this in something very physical? And that's what drove the work. Here you can see I have this illusionary kind of embodied or sort of organic sense, and then there's a sense of the object and the sense of a screen. This is almost like a scanner. I'm moving quickly here. I'm not talking more about each of the work, which I could, just in the interest of time here. Here is a one-off piece. This is in the Sculpture Center show. I've always been interested also in nature, and that was also part of where I wanted the work to be able to expand to. That's why it was so important for me to be able to invoke landscape. So here I was interested in just trying to see of creating an animal, but in this different topography or topological surface. So with just a surface and holes, I was trying to convey the cow. And I was using both the black concrete and yellow concrete with the tile. So in a way, the metaphor would be like expressing a cow in 3D graphics or something like that. There was no 3D graphics, although I think part of my vision came from just an intuitive understanding. When I was studying architecture in the studios, which were, I mean, we actually were studying early architecture in handmade villages, something very anti-technological, even though it was at MIT, and trying to see if those wonderful spaces, we could take basic properties and then use technological materials, but still capture some of those environments that were made by hand that we so much enjoy. So, but next to this it would look like a beach shack in California or something. You open the door and Nicholas Negroponte was building the first kind of 3D graphics computer architecture machine. The computer was the size of a room, and it was the first screen I remember looking at where you could go with an airplane through an entire city and just fly through it and look at behind and in between buildings. So I saw that and I said, this is just incredible. And I felt intuitively that this was going to somehow be part of the future. So I'm showing you these objects here where I'm going from the surface, as I was doing in the ooze pieces, now to making more objects. And you can see I'm using the wheels now. And for me, looking in retrospect, these are almost the beginning of like robotics. They're sort of sentient objects. And I'm going to show you the detail. The reason I really lashed onto the ceramic tile, you can see these curved pieces. These are actually used in the corner of swimming pool splashes. And in exploring the medium, I saw that once there's a curve, then they can become organic. So they can transition seamlessly from the flat geometric into the organic. Excuse me. And that sense of seamlessness was very important to me. And that's been very important in the work in general. So I wanted to be able to go from these different worlds, but to go seamlessly. And that created a lot of the research in terms of the materials I use and how I use them. So here are a few quick works. Here I'm exploring more, seeing whether I could then also move into a more political kind of content. And I was just doing this like a one-off piece at the time, just whether I could take this sort of iconography I'm using and address, you know, body and violence. In this piece, I was imagining you have two objects that are not physically connected, but they're connected through the media, through the screen. So this is before the whole phenomenon of cell phones or wireless, but that was the idea, the crux of this idea, that it's not the connection physically of these that keep it as one piece, it's somehow this here and this above that you feel they're connected. And then this one here was called Cell, and for me this was kind of a distillation of a number of ideas I was dealing with at the time. It's a very large piece. This was called Cell, so it invokes a biological cell, but there's also, and at the time there was no cell phone, but in retrospect, I mean the idea of this screen. And so there's a cell phone, but also cell biology. And the sense of this coming towards you. So this is the sense that this screen and the media is going to start approaching us, and we're not approaching it anymore. And I think that's a very, it's kind of a tipping point in terms of our interaction with technology and media, where the technology now is really becoming almost overpowering us. And the issue now we're dealing with, I feel, is how we can gain agency. How are we going to control this? Because I think we're really getting to the point where we are really losing control of what we want from this stuff that we've created. This piece was, the imagery was coming from a disk at the time. Instead of like a flash drive, we were using disks. And so this is the idea of a disk that in a way is embodied. So the disk you would slip into the computer tower, but I'm imagining that in a way our bodies are in that in some way. So this is kind of an embodied disk. At the same time, it's invoking the idea of scanning. Okay, this was my fourth show at Pat's when she moved to Worcester Street. And I was living in Germany for a couple of years. I'm going to go quickly here. And I was exploring silkscreen. And the reason there is that I felt that I needed to work more technologically, that this working with the hand was still problematic. In a way, I needed to actually approach the technology more. I need to really become the technology, since that's what I'm talking about at the same time. So this was a show I produced in Cologne where I'm just using just 3 or 4 images and using the power of technology and media and printing and production and seeing whether that could produce the show. So with 4 images, I produced the whole show, just in different contexts and formats. I'm gonna go through this quickly. This is called Cellular Automata. These are modules that I printed. These were like done by hand by pastel, and then I put them into a halftone and then printed them silkscreen. So there's no sort of hand, but then it has the affect of handmade materials, which is what I wanted. I wanted to somehow maintain that affect. This is a close-up here, and this is even closer. You can see the silkscreen printing, and where I'm trying to get rid of the lines so that it's a kind of, if you imagine these modules fusing and then expanding. I'm gonna go quicker here. This is a comment on the medical, on just the idea of we're feeding ourselves Coca-Cola and this kind of embodied screen. And this is an idea around the issue of race and technology, where information was actually part of a kind of structural racism. I mean, that's the term we use now, but at the time I was more intuitive. And there's a telephone here at the end. So it's just examining that racism is inhabiting our technologies, and we need to be aware of that. This is a small piece, and this gives you a sense. This was done in pastel. And so I took these and did the halftone, and that's how I generated the works we just saw. This was I made it as a work on paper, but I want to show you that this is a frame that has a rubber gasket. And so the whole thing has this feeling of being sealed in like a vacuum. And I felt that was something also an affect of technology, the idea of our bodies being somehow in this airless medium of whatever it is of technology. And this is a piece I did, again, this is a one-off piece. When I went to Germany, I had to get a certificate of good behavior from the German government, and they required fingerprints. And I thought this was so ironic. And particularly given the history of, mid-20th century Germany. And so I did a piece here using these window frames with the rubber and then with the wired glass, and that this is actually my body, but now literally my fingerprints. And the idea of information, control, surveillance. So this is very in the world issues where the body and technology were going to play themselves out. And that was kind of where I wanted to be able to go once I had this kind of integration or this embodied tech imagery. So here I'm trying to play with themes of, this is silk screen on linen, of the idea of healthcare, but the idea of sort of the information of our bodies then being fed through, and that it affects our literal bodies, in terms of health and disease, and some connecting it. I don't know how successful this work was, but that's what I had in mind in producing the work. And the idea of this flat paper that begins to almost be our bodies. And this is at a time when people were really reacting against the overwhelming paperwork of the healthcare system, before actually it was digitalized. This is a drawing of an imagined installation, which I have not yet executed. So here's the object, and then going to some kind of large wall panel. Whether these were silkscreen printed or there's actual media, that was not articulated. I'm actually right now thinking of actually making this using actual monitors. And here I just wanted to talk about, these were the same images that I showed you in the earlier ones with the silkscreen, printed on these plastic sheets. And so again, I'm actually, and these are sort of like organic, like tissue, the idea of our bodies being in these sheets, that flat sheets that then are somehow fed into an information system. So again, it's this body, the intersection of body and systems and how that happens. Okay, I'm gonna jump now. So in this work here, I'm trying to, you can see now, when I talked about fusing, all the modules now are beginning to fuse into this expanding skin. And again, I'm thinking of the web, the idea of bodies being, or many, many bodies connected over distances, and what that was and how to visualize that. And so there's fingers and there's screens. At the time, I did not imagine, you know, our computers or whatever, but now I see, you know, that's what we do, where it's just our fingers and there's our screens. So that's kind of the feeling, the affect I'm trying to go for here. And so in a way, the screens are within the skin as well. It's hard to articulate this verbally. That's why I do the work. Here I'm bringing in, I'm still working with this idea of the modular flatness, and just like the sculpture, the ooze, it's this flatness that begins to undulate. And here I have the slots, which was inspired when Citibank first opened the ATM, and there were these slots you got your cash from. So I thought that form was somehow very iconic. And this is a temperature dial. This was from Europe. And then this is an incision in a body. So I'm trying to connect technology, and this is, by the way, the mouth of a fish, of a flounder. So rather than just body and technology, I'm trying to connect technology to nature to body, all connected in one continuous kind of membrane. And I think in retrospect, I would say that this is kind of, I think this intuition is going towards biotech at the time, which, you know, did not exist really then. Here I can show you, this is using the silk screen, and I wanted to, this is spray painted on acrylic and then silk screen, and so the spray paint is all dots of color, and then the silk screen is all black dots, so it's just all dots, and then it creates this illusionary world. And so it's a sense of emergence and being molecular, that both technology and the natural world are at this molecular stage. And that's what allows it to sort of grow and to be very organic and fluid. Here I'm being a little more specific. This is like somehow a fish skin or animal skin, and invoking the temperature dial again here. So it's like dialing up nature in some way. And I'm showing this again, we've already looked at it. So this is really, besides being this flatness and about this formal issue, it's also about nature. This technological nature, put it that way. Okay, so what happens here is Photoshop emerges. By the early 2000s, Photoshop emerged, the idea we have these computers at our home, and people began to manipulate images, and I wanted to experiment with what that was about. And I began experimenting with Lego. I was playing just Lego all the time with my son, and it struck me as bizarre that it was taking bodies apart. You can put them together with these sort of plastic objects, and that was exactly the sense that I was working on in my work. So I said, why not do it all together? And here with these are experiments in Photoshop. I could begin to blur them, so there's a sense not of just these things, but that they are actually in motion, in movement. Just as I was talking about with the sense of contingency in the sculpture, that nothing is fixed. And then I spent a year just trying to learn Photoshop. I took a sabbatical from teaching, and this was the work that came out of that year. And this is now a wall at the SculptureCenter show. This is the detail of it. And this was about a kind of, again, this skin that just goes on and on infinitely. These were made from the board of a Lego. And it's a kind of urethane that was used in making sculpture for mold making. And I just pushed that into the back of the Lego board. And it made these bumps. And then I was able, through Photoshop, I took skin and literally went all around the bumps with literal skin. So that to me was like the power of the digital media that was just mind-blowing. And at the same time, the whole issue of fusing these modules, it was totally wiped away because the Photoshop will just fuse it all together organically. And so it did what I was trying to do, but just so much more radically. And so these were the experiments in that, coming from the same sense that I was going at with more traditional media. Now, I could talk a lot more about these works, but we really don't have time, but you just get the sense of the different investigations that were going on here. And then finally, I'm just going to quickly go through work I did in, when I worked in Shanghai for about a couple years, where I was dealing with some family history. And so I took a departure. Well, actually, before I go there, I should just, let me just pause a moment. I think we have maybe 5 minutes here. I want to just briefly, I spent a number of years working with interactive media. And this is the beginning of Max MSP, for those of you who are familiar with that programming where sound and body movements with sensors could come together. And so this, I worked with a student of mine who was the programmer, and we did this in a total experiment.
This interactive installation includes the following: a steel table-like frame supporting a body landscape made of silicone, rubber, and plastic. A train moves over the landscape carrying a wireless camera which feeds video images of the landscape into the computer. On the side, a curved steel bar holds 6 infrared sensors. As the viewer approaches the bar, sensors track the viewer's movement. These sensors send signals to the computer software, activating sounds and images. The whole experience happens instantly in real time, creating a dynamic sensory experience of image, sound, and object. The demo DVD you are about to see shows aspects of the interaction of the viewer with the work, and a changing video image typical of what will be projected in real time onto a large surface.
Okay, we don't have time to see. I'm gonna just jump through. You can see some of these. So this is all very experimental. I was just seeing sort of what would happen with this particular mode, and let me just. Okay, so I just want to make a comment. This was being programmed from scratch, and Sam, the programmer I worked with, all of this he programmed where we were experimenting with the program. So that's why I say it's highly experimental here. I would like to go back to this kind of work, but it takes a lot of focus. So now I'm just going to talk my little body of work from Shanghai quickly, where I was going into some family history. I was using images of photo albums where I was, well, I should start here. This is where I'm using silk screen. So I reacted against the digital work because it was too controlled. And I was trying to see how I could get material back on. I was working with silicone, but silicone won't bond to anything. So I put a stainless steel wire material over the digital print, and then put the silicone within this mesh and it would physically bond with the screen. And that was just how I worked. Now, this created a sense of memory because of the grayness of the screen. And at the time when I did it, I thought, it's too bad I'm not dealing with history. And then little did I know that I ended up dealing with family history when I went, but that happened about a couple, 2-3 years later. So this was my first experiment with it. I was still dealing with body and trying to now work more with hand because I missed real materiality, and that's very important. And I decided at the time, I reevaluated this whole technological push, and that this would be more of a hybrid reality we would be in. We'd be dealing with our body in a very physical way, at the same time dealing with this illusionary technology. And so with that mode of working, I then explored this family history using photography and historical photographs. And here is an example of the work where it, as you went to the side, you no longer saw the images, and then when you looked at it from the front, you saw them, so it was a little bit like memory. This is a detail from one of the works where I had the silicone and then manipulated it digitally. I think I'm gonna have to stop now. This is some later work that I did in the show I did it called Delete Show. This is silicone on a digital print on dye bond aluminum. I'll just show you one more here. This is silicone on top of the dye bond aluminum. And I'll just show you quickly, just through an image. These are some very recent works I'm toying with the silicone now with the digital imaging. This is the medium I'm working now is printing on aluminum, and that sets up a whole new kind of dynamic in terms of material. And then this one I just recently did. Okay. Lucy, that's it.
Great, thank you so much. Did you want to get out of screen share? Great. Wow, thank you so much for that. That was, I was trying to telepathically tell you to not rush because I wanted to see more images. Like, no, lose track of time. But I appreciate you taking that into consideration. It was sort of a teaser because I could see all the images you were skipping. So I'm going to dive right into the questions because there are some good ones that I think will take some time to sort of discuss. I certainly have a bunch of my own, but a lot of these touch on some of my questions. Okay, so the first one is from one of our grad students, Jason. I'm interested if you have a relationship to popular science fiction films of the 70s and 80s, like Alien and the drawings of H.R. Giger, Blade Runner, Star Trek, and the Borg.
Okay, people have brought up this issue of what was going on in media and film many, many times. And as I mentioned, certainly Videodrome or Cronenberg. I was aware of that work, and I was aware, I mean, actually at the time in the 80s, I felt somehow that music and film was ahead of art. And I don't know why. So yes, there was some sense of this kind of science fiction sense to things, and certainly Blade Runner. But I felt I was not interested in science fiction. So I think that's the answer. I did not see what I was doing as a fictional world. I saw this as properties of a world we were going to move into. And so I wanted the work to not be seen as science fiction. So that was the whole idea. I didn't want to have a square painting where you just look into this fantasy world. That this relates to the world that we are in. Now, in retrospect, the world wasn't quite there yet. I think perhaps one reason that people can or seem to respond more to the work now is because I think our world is much more there now, as opposed to being a fiction. But interestingly enough, actually, science fiction itself has become much, much more, how should I say, relevant, not as fiction, but as a kind of imagination of what is going on now. So even science fiction itself has changed in terms of technology. So there's an interesting dialogue there. Yeah.
The next question, sort of related. You seem from another grad student, Davis. You seem to have such a perceptive and prophetic vision into the future of societal interface with technology. What do you think about the current state of digital saturation and control and our future of autonomy and identities or lack thereof? For example, information wars, deep fakes, etc.
Okay, well, that's a big question. I mean, it takes a long answer here. So I think, well, first of all, I think what's going on now in terms of my work is I don't need now to, I feel like in a way I don't need to stretch for my content. The content, instead of in my imagination, is just right in front of me. It's just having this Zoom talk right now. I mean, I could do work just around what is going on here. In terms of what's happened now, which we did not imagine, or we couldn't have, I think there is a big issue of agency and control and the politics of technology now. And I think we're all aware of it. It's, in a way, technology has heightened the problems of politics and power. And I think it's just an enormous question everybody's dealing with. Countries, the whole world is dealing with this. And I think that has to be played out. I mean, this is just huge. This is what the world has to deal with. And AI is going to make it even worse. So how we're going to maintain agency or what we think is of value to hold on to is the question that we have to explore. So there's no answer to the question, really. I think in terms of my work, I see it as it's basically asking a question. The question is, so what is this that we are entering into? This is unprecedented, what we're dealing with, and we don't know where it's going. We don't know where we are in it. And I think for me, the work is just asking the question, where are we? What is this about? And to try to slow down this whole transition we're going through. And that's it, really.
The next question is from Smaranda. What was your motivation behind abandoning the path of architecture as a career? How did you find that your studies of architecture influenced your art?
Well, I still love architecture. I follow it closely in terms of, as a creative practice. I was very ambivalent about being an artist, and I tried to figure out how I could do something creative in a more so-called, professional field like architecture. But at a certain point, I felt that I didn't have a choice. It was a kind of dis-ease that I think of. There's often a saying that, how to be a writer is you just go and do whatever you can. And if you can't do anything else, then you'll be a writer. And so there's a certain point at which, like a year or two out of grad school, that I began to realize this is just something I needed to do. And I needed to have the courage just to embrace it. Did architecture influence? Architecture influenced in many ways, at least where I studied. In much of the world we are today, I was seeing the seeds of it really in the environment at MIT. And I went to MIT, it wasn't just, at MIT. I mean, I was not a programmer. I actually got into class where they were trying to reduce or lower their standards, just round out the class a little more. But that I felt the world was going to be technological. And as an artist, I thought it was important to go towards it rather than to make it an other, to make it something separate. And I was interested in getting what the feeling of technology was and how do these people think about technology. And I did get that at MIT very much. And the whole garage aesthetic, everything was there at the time. So yes, that's the whole atmosphere I got from there.
We have a question here from a faculty member, Jaya Howie. Is it too sophomoric to ask if you've made any adjustments in terms of negotiating your relationship to tech in your daily life? Where's your balance in terms of asserting a certain amount of control in an environment where the default mode is one where the technology seems to have more agency than the user? In other words, what are your thoughts on smartphones?
You're asking me like the question of the hour. So I feel I am addicted to technology. I am a news junkie. I mean, it's partly because of the world we're living in right now, but the phone, everything, you know, it's just amazing, and it's just an amazing world to be living in when this thing has emerged. But at the same time, I am very aware I am addicted to it, and I can't stop it. And I think that's one of the biggest things, or one of the biggest issues I'm dealing with, is how to diminish technology in my life. I don't have an answer. I think technology is taking more agency than it should, and we are losing control of it. And particularly for children growing up, I think that's what really is a crisis here. I saw that when I was teaching. I remember at one point in my teaching studio course, when I said, okay, now we're just going to work, you know, free work time, and a third of the class just turned their computers. And I said, this is the first time I've ever seen that. And I just stopped it immediately. I said, okay, look, if you don't have work of your own you want to do right now, fine. Then just I want you to do drawings. You cannot just turn to your computers. And I don't think they knew that there was any alternative. So they had this entire studio with all the materials, and they turned to their computers. So that's just an example that hit me. You know, that was about 8 years ago. Yeah.
It's true. A lot of students too, they don't, you know, when they work from photo references, they're not holding actual photographs. They're actually looking at phones, which the way light works is so different. I don't even know, you know, the color, it's just mind blowing.
So there are two comments I want to make there. So one is, at the same time, I have to say, I noticed as, you know, more technology was being used by students, they would come in and they would want to learn traditional materials. They want to use traditional techniques. They were not interested in technology and art. So I thought that was interesting. They want to learn how to make things by hand. At the same time, there's a whole nother attitude we could have, is there's going to be a point that people won't already. I mean, there's generations now that don't know what the world was analog anymore. And I have my assistant in New York. I mean, she said, you know, it's been with her so long now. She sees my work as almost a little bit behind, because it's when you were entering into technology. She's so in it, she doesn't even see it's a thing to enter, that it's like air already to her. And I think there is a saying that, you know, something will come out of that whole consciousness in which the tension may not even be there anymore. And for those of us who know an analog world, who know a walk in the woods, it may seem like something profound has been lost. But I mean, if you study history, I mean, you know, what would people 300 years ago think of looking the way we live right now? I mean, you know, it's like that.
Yeah. I mean, I think we're literally evolving with technology. Like our neuron, you know, the growth of our cells are reacting to all that. We have someone in the audience who would like to ask a question in person, I think. Dina. Hey, Dina. Dina. Oh, maybe that's not what she wanted to do. Let me. Sorry, I don't know how to get rid of the. Hey, Jordan, do you know how to never mind. I'll move on to the next question for now. Tishan, I noticed you're participating in an exhibition, The Body Electric. You mentioned feeling like the art world lagged a bit behind music and film in embracing the technological collision with the body. Do you feel this may be because art has a tendency to look back and be retrospective, in that you're now in group shows that curate around themes you focused on in the 80s?
Is that the question?
Yeah, that was the question.
Okay. So this brings up a couple of issues I think are important. At base, I think cultures generally live in the past. They don't live in the present. What we think of as the future really is just the present. It's there, it's in front of us, but we tend to be patterned on the past. So in terms of the perception now and what I was dealing with then, I think, yes, I think now that we're so much more in it than we were in the 80s, it's more comfortable now to talk about this, to talk about the body and technology, and that we're becoming the technology, because people can see it in their own lives. They can see the overwhelming aspect. They can feel it. But this was going on 20 years ago already. But now, people watching TV 20 hours a week or 10 hours a day, or whatever. So yes, there's this lag. I think in terms of my own, the perception of my own work, I just happened to emerge in the 80s when there was a lot of critical theory and coming out of post-structuralism and dealing with commodification of the culture. And the art world can only take in so many issues at once. So I think it was just that technology in the body wasn't it wasn't the overriding, how should I say, lived experience of people at the time. On the surface, I should put it that way. And then after that, then came the issues of identity and the political issues of art in general and the culture, which were all extremely important. And I think part of the perception of my work now is actually coming from that as well. I didn't talk about my whole work as an expression of my Asian American identity in some sense. And that's a whole nother area I could have gone into. And the idea of why did I do what I do? And perhaps there could be a discussion about my inability, for instance, to adopt images from media, which is what many of my contemporaries were doing, from media, from film, from Hollywood. That was just not real enough for me. And so one literature professor told me, in a way, she's actually a professor of Asian American literature, she said, even though my themes were not about my ethnic identity, in a way she saw my entire practice is really about my identity. And that's like a whole nother discussion.
We have a question here from Caroline. Can you talk more about your return to the material due to the digital being too controlled?
Okay, so this was a really critical decision point in my practice. For a while, particularly you can see with the work with the digital, I was just totally like, wow, this is just incredible, the power of it. And the merging of photography and then the real world, I mean, in the sense of like I didn't have to describe the skin. I was literally carving with the skin through photography. But when I produced it, and the whole process of producing it in New York, I was working with Digital Dugal Labs, which is like the printer for fashion, like Calvin Klein billboards. And they wanted artists to work with them. But there was a sense that once I printed, that was it. Because of the inks, you couldn't touch it. If I tried to put acrylic paint, it would just bleed the image. So, and it just felt, coming from real media, that the spontaneity of real materials was lost. And it felt too, so I tried to think, now what in my real experience could justify my wanting to go to real materials without feeling that I was being retro, or that I didn't have the courage to just take in pure digital. And in fact, we have like post-internet art, so to speak, or post-production. And I felt that the reality really was also a kind of material mixed with this digital technology. And that the whole sense of the body was not going to go away. That the vulnerabilities and our organic reality, which to me is about materiality, was still very much there. And I think the pandemic we're in now is like an unimagined example of that hybridity. That there could be this molecular organic virus that is forcing us to go into this digital internet communication and connection. But at the same time, fortunately, we have that to connect, but that the two are working in parallel. We've got this digital molecular media that we can connect to. At the same time, the organic molecular is invading our, is a matter of life and death in a way. And so that is a kind of validation of my decision to want to have materiality in my work. And that means that when you see the work, so many people say that when they see the work, they never would have imagined it, having seen so much only through the internet. And I think that, to me, that's a validation for the work, that your body is still important, and there's something when your body is experiencing the work in the real that you will never get by looking at it digitally, no matter how good digital gets. And I want to affirm the body in that way.
Thank you. There's a question from a grad student, Sarah, but Sarah, I'm going to skip your question because I think it relates to the previous question. We have a question here from Mel. Your early work focuses on such futuristic out-of-body material, but your recent work seems to focus more on personal aspects. Currently, it seems as though most art is very highly tied into self-identity, even more so than previous years. I'm interested in whether you think heritage and the self and art is ultimately related, or whether it can be separated.
I don't know whether he meant to say heritage and art needs to be separated. No, I don't. Okay, so let me just explain a little bit where I was from. So my mother died in 2012, and that precipitated, on a very personal level, a complete reorientation to, my whole life growing up in America, my identity, many, many things that happen when parents die. And I had the opportunity to go work in Shanghai. And it was also a time, actually, that the contemporary art world in China was really becoming very interesting. I had lived in Cologne for 2 years, so that I feel like, prepared me for going to a place like China. I don't speak Chinese, and it was like really alien. But it was, to me, when I went, I said, look, if you never show this work and no one wants to see it, is it still worth doing? And I said to myself, yes. So it was a very internal process that I wanted to produce a body of work in China and about my own personal history. So it was a complete divergence from this whole issue of technology in the body, which was still very central to me. But it was coming out of mourning. My sister said, you're just mourning mother, whatever. So, but I felt a need to do it. And because of the work I was doing, as I mentioned, with the stainless steel wire cloth, where there's a sense of memory, I already had a sense of how I would work, which was half the battle. So at first I thought I'd just go there and just, work with whatever's there. And I didn't want to take any of my studio. I didn't want to take any of the way I work. I was going to just start from scratch. But this happened to just link in. So it was a very personal thing. And actually, when I left, I did talk to some galleries, and a lot of people were interested in the project. There were some political issues with what I was doing that was purely coincidental. So I was dealing with images that were from the Cultural Revolution, which is not my immediate family's history, because my parents came after the revolution in the late 40s. But the sense of trauma and politics was very much there. So that was a time when actually you couldn't talk about that period of history. So that was just my luck. So even if people like the work, no, we don't want to deal with this. So that was fine with me. It was something I just wanted to do, and the idea of doing something very, very personal, I thought was important. And in a way, I thought it was not so important what the work would be, but what I would do after that work, which is the work I'm doing now. So in a way, it's about a process. And I think to talk about the personal, it's not so much about heritage, it's about the personal. And you have to realize, growing up in America, my own personal history, my family's history was very much blocked because of the trauma. I was raised in America in the 50s, when it was a time when everybody just wanted to assimilate into American culture. That was it. There was no identity politics, period. And there was no question even. And my parents totally embraced it. So I had a lot to kind of retrieve in terms of my past. And I think that they say to do good work as a creative person, it's very important to somehow connect to your personal. And that really good work is often extremely personal. That's why it often looks so weird or distinctive, because only you can create the work that you create. And if you can get to that point, which is not easy, and get out of all of the tropes that you have been taught, then you get at something what we might call original or authentic. So going to the personal didn't scare me because I knew of that paradigm in creative work. Yeah.
And then the final question is actually my own, and it relates to the last bit you said there. So you taught for many years at Sarah Lawrence, and everything you said in some ways has to do with, you learn, but then also to be a good artist, you kind of have to abandon what you learn or be willing to turn away from it. And just in terms of your experience as a teacher, how do you think that's influenced your studio practice, or how you thought about your own work after, say, a week of teaching in the studio?
Well, it changed. So I taught half-time, so that helped. So at first, my teaching was just a gig. So it just happened to be, I was offered a position at Sarah Lawrence, which is a very nice place to teach. But I, pretty much compartmentalized them. I did my teaching and then I did my work, and they were separate. And for a number of years, I basically gave a kind of comprehensive overview of the history of sculpture in a studio practice way. And the students, were somewhat responsive, but, there was issues. And Sarah Lawrence students tend to be very, they're very creative, very, they like to really take risks, be very experimental. So at a certain point, I became more aware of sort of Deleuze and the certain ideas around Deleuze that really were compelling for me and that connected to my work. That's a whole nother discussion, but I began to bring in my practice with my teaching. And that really changed my teaching, and the students really responded well to it. I think where the teaching had influence was really being in the environment of Sarah Lawrence College, which is a liberal arts college, versus MIT. And there I was able to connect to a lot of other things, particularly, a lot of the philosophy, critical theory, Asian American literature, which connected back to Deleuze. So all of that stuff, and as well as the students themselves, I mean, the questions they would ask and the issues they were dealing with, I really kept up with a lot of things going on in contemporary culture. And the issues of diversity on campus, these were all very real issues, and that's the issues going on in the art world. So in that way, it was just a kind of continuous world. But getting it with my students is much more intimate, and so I was able to really have discussions about all of this in very real time, which was very valuable. The art world doesn't really have these kind of groups so much, perhaps in some historical way in the 50s that people imagine going to a bar and everybody knows each other. But teaching really gave me some of that kind of world. Yeah.
And you just described my favorite part about teaching. Well, thank you so much. I think we'll end it here, but thank you again for such a generous talk, such a fascinating talk. And thank you to everyone who could attend, and have a good night.
Thank you.